Hello, everybody. I'm Yvonne Schmobson, your substitute teacher. This is wonderful water that comes from the purifying lake Minnetonka. Inside of it is a singular hand-carved piece of ice, which I carved by hand myself while listening to Imagine Dragons. What song do you listen to when you hand carve your ice? All right, that was weird. I don't know who that was. Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 3. I hope you're all doing well. First thing I want to clear up, because I think I'm confusing some people. When you see an assignment with 0 points, that means there's nothing to turn in for that assignment. That'll often happen with things that are required reading. For example, I want you to read something, so I make it an assignment. However, unlike some teachers who might ask for some kind of trivial write-up or proof, I trust you. So I trust you, and I know you're busy people. I know a lot of you have other classes, you have jobs, you have families, so we don't need to do any of that nonsense. So 0 points means that there's 0 to do beyond what the assignment calls for. More likely than not, these are going to be required readings. So I will say that when we get into essay writing, which I will talk about today, you will need to cite things from the text that you have already read. So that's why I ask you to annotate what you read, so you don't have to look back and try to find things that take a lot of time. So the reading is important in that, well, it might not be turning anything in for it. It could make the difference. It often, almost certainly, will make getting a good grade easier on the essay. So in essays, specifics are what often make the difference between effective writing and non-effective writing. You should already know that I place value on the individual voice. Be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. So the winning combination is you, right? Your voice. And one way, and I think there's more than one way to get to our individual voices. When I think about using my own voice, I try not to use words that I haven't used all week, right? Do I follow that to a T? No, but I try to consider, okay, is this how I normally talk, right? Is this the way I normally communicate? And I'm pretty much presenting you the information in a way that's authentic to me, right? So I think the hardest word I might have used is annotate, and that's because I need to use it. Let me see. Yeah. So imagine if instead of me being myself, I came at you more with an inauthentic, kind of like professory voice. If I was like, I'd like to take a moment to address a point of confusion that seems to have surfaced. When you encounter an assignment marked with 0 points, this signifies there is no tangible submission required. One piece of guidance I offer in cultivating your voice is to avoid incorporating vocabulary that feels foreign to you, especially words that you haven't naturally used in recent conversation. This helps maintain authenticity. In my own lectures, for instance, I don't indulge in unnecessary elaborate language unless context demands of it, right? So imagine if I communicated in that style, right? Kind of like that garbage style. Most of you would be like, okay, I'm out. So think about it. If you don't want me to communicate in that way, I'm kind of the same way. Why would I want you to communicate in an inauthentic way, right? So if you think something's rad, feel free to write even in your essay. I think that's rad. If you feel the need to write something like, I think some of Darwin's theories are utter bullshit, and you want to use the word bullshit, use the word bullshit. I want to encourage you to be you, right? And to not overly, you don't need to overly complicate essays, right? So, who's that really smart guy? Einstein, right? Einstein said, if you don't understand, what did he say? He said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough, right? And another example would be really famous poet Du Fu, right? Chinese poet, lived around, I don't know, the year 700, 750 AD, right? I think like Tang Dynasty, right? He would write a poem. The story is that he would go to the river where the working class people were working. He would read the poem. If they didn't understand everything, he would come back, he would rewrite it, he would go back down, and he would keep revising until everybody who heard the poem understood it. And if you think about it, right now he's kind of one of the most historically significant poets of the last, thousands of years, right? So a lot of times simplicity, clarity, right? Those things, they're much more effective than kind of trying to be ornate or complicated. So, right? We'll talk about style more in the future. A lot of style, writing style, right? When people go, oh, what's their style? A lot of that is simply word choice, right? If just like cooking, right? If you cook Caribbean food, you would use some different ingredients than if you were cooking French food, than if you were cooking Italian food, right? So styles of cooking, right? Just our ingredients are words. Styles of clothing, right? Styles of writing. New Yorkers, people on the East Coast might use different words than people on the West Coast, right? So the other thing to really try to work with in the essays is to be specific, right? So wrote a little example. Let's say you're writing about the man who knew Belle Starr through feminist literary criticism. Here's an example of something that I would not want. And you might even notice at first glance, it might sound pretty good. And I'll just read like a little bit. Belle is both idealized and objectified by the male protagonist, who is fascinated by her persona, but seems unable to see her as a fully realized individual with agency. This reflects the broader societal tendency to romanticize women who defy traditional gender roles while simultaneously stripping them of true power or autonomy. The story subtly critiques this dynamic, revealing how men often view women through a lens of their own desires and insecurities rather than acknowledging their complexities as individuals. This reinforces the feminist idea that women are often reduced to symbols or objects within male-centered narratives, right? So, kind of sounds fairly academic at first glance. It might even sound kind of good. So what's problematic about it? For one, there's way too many kind of assertions, right? The writer is just like, it's this and this and that, right? Way too many claims. How long would it take to really effectively flesh all of that out, right? Even everything that's just mentioned in that one paragraph. It might take 25 or 50 pages, right, to effectively write that as an essay, right? And then it skips right over the critical thinking questions that are just kind of begging to be answered. How does he specifically idealize her? How does he specifically objectify her? How is he fascinated by her? Why does he idealize her? Why does he objectify her? Why is he fascinated by her? What specific historic context makes him idealize her? What makes it possible to objectify her? What historically makes male protagonists fascinated often by women characters, right? And I haven't even gotten to the end of that first sentence, and those are the questions that are going off, right? what is meant by agency in the context of the story, or even what is meant by individuality, right? So I could go on and on with how this writing, while sounding academic, it's just simply more of a word salad than actual effective writing, right? And then all of the assertions, because they're pretty big assertions, right? If we're truly writing academically about it, to be effective, they would pretty much require cited evidence and quotes, right? So, right, you make a big claim, what's the bark on the tree, right? How are you going to protect that claim? You're going to protect it by offering effective evidence, right? This would call for so much evidence. So how do we avoid kind of like a word salad that can sound academic, right? But really just kind of mean nothing or very little, right? One is we write using our own voices, right? Just be you. And two, work to write very specifically, right? Those who, what, where, when, why, and how questions, they should be considered, right? Not saying that you want to use all of them for everything, because you don't. But on major assertions, they become really important to consider. Put yourself in the reader's shoes. What would you specifically want to know? And three, avoid going too broad with your overall essay topic, right? The first essay is going to be a 4-pager. It's not a 24-pager, right? So, right? So an example of maybe being more specific dealing, you could say something like, hey, on page 250, when McRib first sees Belle, he immediately picks her up as though he feels completely safe in doing so. Shortly afterwards, on page 255, McRib thinks to himself, I forget exactly what he thinks, like, wow, it's way creepier than what I'm going to say. It's like, wow, she's good looking. I'd like to get to know her. And then he highlights specific parts of her body, which kind of dissects her into singular objects rather than a complete human being, right? So while not uncommon for men and women to notice particular things about particular bodies, right, the overused message, especially in 20th century literature, often works to reinforce the acceptable dissection of girls and women, right? And then you could add even more evidence. According to the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, well, there's nothing wrong with admiring particular aspects of a body. There is an unhealthy perpetuation of it towards women, particularly in movies and literature of current today and the 20th century. Over-objectification sets a dangerous point of view that works to turn human beings into objects, right? So, well, not perfect. You kind of see, like, I'm getting more specific. I'm taking one little part, I'm citing examples, I might cite evidence, and I'm getting very specific with what I mean. So, so my point in your writing, this metaphor helps me. Think of a water well, right? What is a well where you get water? It's not very big. It's kind of shallow or narrow. It's not shallow, and it's deep, right? So think narrow, small, and deep. Gets to the source, right? Gets to the real source. What you don't want to do is build a swimming pool, which is really big and expansive, but isn't that deep, right? And it's kind of artificially sourced water, right? So narrow and deep, not big and shallow. So this week, we're going to finish up reading Real Women Have Curves. The assignments are going to be pre-writing, rough drafts, making an outline, right? All the pre-writing and rough drafts are required to be done by hand. I don't remember if I just put for the rough draft if it needs to be done by hand or not. So defer to whatever it says on Canvas. I can think of reasons for both, right? Valid reasons. But the other stuff needs to be done by hand, goes back to the evidence that there's more neurological action when hands and the brain are kind of working together and not typing on a keyboard. I would say probably all of us learn to write by hand. It's a link to your childhood, probably a time when you were likely at a peak of creativity and imagination and exploration, right? So doing generative and pre-writing things by hand can be really helpful in activating different parts of your imagination, right? So week 3 module, you see pre-writing assignments. The assignment calls for you to pick at least 2 pre-writing activities. I think 2 out of 4. Also, make an outline for your essay, right? I also put in feminist literary criticism essay guidelines and place to submit before you do any pre-writing, right? Notice that assignment isn't due, I think, until the 22nd of September, but I wanted to put it in now so you can kind of gear up, you can see what you're working towards. So you don't have to think like, oh my God, it's not due this week, but I want you to be able to kind of see it and look at it. And if you haven't done so, definitely read please read Feminist Literary Criticism handout from last week before doing any of the pre-writing. So read the overview of what the essay is, get caught up on kind of the other reading if you're not, before you do the pre-writing. Right, and you'll see the pre-writing, it'll be like, do you want to cluster, free write, brainstorm, or list? There are some kind of light directions in there, but not a lot, because at this level, all of you should have been exposed to a lot of pre-writing, and if you didn't get that, you got cheated somewhere, because you were supposed to be taught that. So remember, you're not bound to your outline. You can create an outline and change it later anytime. You're not bound to the rough draft that you produce, right? That's what a rough draft is. It kind of gets it out. It might change a little, it might change a lot. Right, that rough draft asks you to cite, I think, at least one thing from each of the readings. Right, those citations, those parenthetical citations, want to include page numbers. You should probably put a works cited page down there. So again, let's see. Next week, it's going to be pretty simple. I don't know why my dogs are barking. The main things next week are going to be peer reviews, rough drafts, and, well, peer reviews on the rough drafts and then turning in the final draft, right? If there's reading, it won't be a lot. I want all of you to have enough time to focus on, making a nice essay. So, so feminist literary criticism, right? You've seen that in the details from last week, right? The essay prompt, you'll see that. So in part, it says the essay does not want to summarize, but rather seeks to be a personal response that only you could write. I genuinely want to know what you personally think and what you personally feel after reading these pieces and looking at society through a feminist lens. Of note, since Real Women Have Curves is the longest piece that we read, you will want to make that kind of center stage in your essay, right? You'll want to pull in some of the other pieces, but a lot of your focus should be on Real Women Have Curves. You'll see that. Let's see. So when we're talking about feminist literary criticism and the reading, think about how influenced by society the lead female characters are. Are there societal pressures that are internal or external or both for them to conform to certain societal standards? And then when they don't conform as readers, are we surprised, right? So notice how refreshing it might feel when a character goes against some set of kind of traditional gender roles, right? And some people like traditional roles and some people don't, and that choice is for individuals to make, right? The key is being a choice, right? And not that women are obliged or kind of forced or heavily persuaded to do one thing or be one thing, right? That they get to make an honest choice, right? Look at historical context of the pieces you read. Like if we take The New You, I think it was written in 1962. I'm going to go with that, right? If we think about kind of how we could alter our bodies in 1962 versus now, right? She might be working with more of what would be like a sci-fi view of it, where today, right, we have kind of procedures, right? I can go get wrinkles removed without really like a lot of damage or downtime or like scars or anything like that, right? So we do want to kind of take into consideration like historical context of pieces. Like in 1962, was something like Botox even available, right? Probably, I would say no, but not 100% sure. Goals and objectives, you'll see that. And I just highlighted a couple little parts. Feminist literary criticism examines gender roles and power dynamics, right? Feminist critics often aim to explore how literature portrays gender roles and power imbalances, highlighting the way in which they perpetuate or challenge societal norms. Feminist critics often seek to bring attention to the experiences and perspectives of marginalized individuals, particularly women who have been historically neglected or silenced. And these highlights could also include other intersections like socioeconomics or cultural kind of intersections, right? Analytical approaches and feminist literary criticism. Again, you'll see all this in the handout. I highlighted looking for stereotypes, limited roles, or objectification, as well as instances of agency, empowerment, and complex characterization, right? And I think that is pretty key for the reading and taking the reading and turning it into writing, right? Look for stereotypes, limited roles, or objectification, as well as instances of agency, empowerment, or complex characterization, right? Examine stereotypes. Another thing I highlighted is the subversion of gender norms, exploring alternative narratives and non-conforming characters, right? So is Belle Starr a conforming character, right? How is she maybe different from kind of the stereotypical character, right? That might be found in a short story in that time period, right? Feminist critics look for literary works that challenge and disrupt traditional gender norms by presenting alternative narratives, non-conforming characters, or exploring things like gender fluidity, right? So, I think those will be keys to explore, right? Alternative narratives, non-conforming characters, right? Right. So even if you think about the cast that would be seen in Real Women Have Curves, right? How many men would be seen on stage in that play, right? And how might that number kind of be a challenge or disruptive to kind of traditional plays, right, of the time? Something to think about. How literature can challenge and redefine traditional gender roles by depicting characters who defy societal expectations, emphasizing the agency and autonomy of women, right? Again, right, in one of the stories you'll certainly, actually in all of it, you could see an interesting power dynamic. So I think that kind of covers some of the highlights, kind of covers everything. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I understand that, you know, you might be figuring some of this stuff out. I'm here to help. And yeah, so anyways, have a great week. Bye.